النظام العام بما في ذلك حماية الحياة البشرية أو الصحة، وتجيز استثناء النباتات والحيوانات. التساؤلات اللي أمامنا: استثناء حماية أجزاء من مكونات جسم الإنسان، الأعضاء، الأنسجة، الخلايا، الجينات، وإلى أي مدى نمشي؟ أيضا مدى إمكانية استثناء أجزاء النباتات والحيوانات والمخلوقات الدقيقة الموجودة في الطبيعة والتي يتم اكتشافها. كما سمعنا في الصباح الاستثناءات من الحقوق الممنوحة، استثناء بولر أيضا مطروح أمام دول المجلس لكي يدرج في مشروع القانون. التراخيص الإجبارية ما أكده إعلان الدوحة بشأن تريبس والصحة العامة، وأحكام تعديل اتفاقية تريبس الأخيرة التي لا زالت في طور المصادقة، وصادقت عليها عضوين من دول المجلس حول مراعاة الدول محدودة القدرة التصنيعية للأدوية. مدى إمكانية منح تراخيص إجبارية عند نقص الأدوية والادفاع غير العادي في أسعارها، الاستنفاد الاكسوسيشن، والاستيراد الموازي، وما ذكر في الصباح حول هذا الموضوع. متطلب الإلزام بالإفصاح ببيان أفضل أسلوب لتطبيق الاختراع. متطلب الكشف عن مصادر الموارد الوراثية، ونحن نتكلم هنا لا يعني هذا الموضوع طبعا يتناول على مستوى دولي ولا زال هناك فيه مداولات فيه، لكن هنا ما هي خياراتنا في دول المجلس بالنسبة لهذه المواضيع؟ تخفيف آثار تريبس الناشئة عن حماية الأدوية. سمعنا في الصباح عدم حماية الاستخدامات الجديدة للمواد المعروفة، وهذا مطروح أيضا. الأدوية المصنعة من مواد طبيعية، إلى أي مدى تعريفنا للأحياء الدقيقة، ماذا تشمل وماذا لا تضمن ضمن هذا التعريف. انتهيت من العرض مقترحاتي حول التشريعات والسياسات في دول المجلس، وأن يعني تحاول دول المجلس أن توفر الحد الأدنى من معايير الحماية عند صياغة قوانين براءة الاختراع الوطنية أو الإقليمية. أيضا تسعى دول المجلس إلى دمج الجهات المعنية بالملكية الفكرية سواء على المستوى الوطني أو في إطار مجلس التعاون. استمرار الجهود بشأن إيجاد استراتيجيات وسياسات وطنية للملكية الفكرية في دول المجلس. هناك جهود حقيقة أعرف منها الجهود في سلطنة عمان الاستراتيجية للملكية الفكرية والابتكار، وجهود أخرى أعتقد في المملكة العربية السعودية هناك جهود في هذا الموضوع. وأيضا الشروع في رسم سياسة موحدة للملكية الفكرية لدول مجلس التعاون، مما يسهل جهود توحيد قوانين الملكية الفكرية فيما بينها وتوحيد سياساتها أمام الدول والمنظمات الدولية كما نصت عليه المادة 20 من الاتفاقية الاقتصادية. أشكر لكم استطاعتكم، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
شكرا أستاذ شايع، شكرا على المقترحات اللي اختتمت فيها العرض. ممكن يكون بوقت المناقشة نناقش وندرجه كتوصيات. الجلسة الثانية بعنوان أجندة الاستراتيجيات الجديدة للملكية الفكرية. لماذا تعتبر الملكية الفكرية مفتاح للنجاح في الاقتصاد المعرفي؟ يتشارك فيها الدكتور باول جيرميرد رئيس شركة أصول الملكية الفكرية، ودكتور راشد خان رئيس فريق إدارة أصول الملكية الفكرية في شركة أرامكو. فليتفضل.
Again, it's my pleasure to be able to come speak with you this afternoon. Thank you so much for the invitation. I wish to thank the organizing committee for inviting me, and I wish to thank you in the audience for bearing with me today. I apologize, I don't speak or write Arabic, so I'm going to be delivering my speech in English. So I hope you'll understand and forgive me for that. I'd like to talk to you about the intellectual property strategy agenda, specifically why intellectual property is key to success in the knowledge economy. For myself, there are two sides to that. One is it really something that's important? And then to really be a key, you have to be able to understand why it's important in a way to take advantage of it and make success of it. I hope to address both parts of that in my chat with you this afternoon. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to start by giving some examples of why intellectual property is key to success, articles out of some newspapers and journal articles. Then I'd like to talk a little bit about how did we get there? What is it about the way the world of commerce works that has set the stage for intellectual property being important? Then, as I mentioned, I'd also like to speak a bit about if it's important, is it something that we can understand or manage in a way that we can make successful businesses? So I'd like to talk a little bit about managing the complexity that appears to be important today in a way that you can generate commercial success from it. And lastly, I'd like to address what types of individuals and organizations should be responsible for the intellectual property. To get started then, I'm sharing with you just some headlines that have come out of some of the newspapers, journals around the world. The first one was from Forrester. It talks about the waste that is within U.S. corporations because they're not fully utilizing their intellectual property assets. These are assets that they could be licensing out that they're not taking advantage of. The second example shows how much a company, in this case Lilly's, market value dropped because it lost a claim in a patent. This was in litigation, so this was about their ability to hold on to an exclusive advantaged commercial position because the investors saw that they weren't going to have the market that they anticipated. The company was punished accordingly. Samsung also had the same example more recently. They lost almost 7.5% of their shareholders' value when they lost a patent infringement case to Apple. It was a case of freedom to operate from their standpoint. And lastly is a quote from Google. This one's about a year old. They've changed significantly in that time to now. They didn't invest at that time in the patent ecosystem. They didn't understand the value at that time. They realized that was a mistake on their part, and they've been working over the last year feverishly to improve that position. I'll say by way of background that I'm located, I reside in Silicon Valley. Google, Facebook are neighbors of mine, and believe me, the people that I know that work there are working very hard to fix the problem that you see described here. So if you look at this, what you see is that the economic value, the worth of companies is greatly affected by how the world looks at their ability to manage and use intellectual property. In my case, I'm going to focus primarily on patents, how they didn't manage their patents well enough, and the companies suffered the consequences of not doing so. It's to alleviate these points that I wish to speak to you this afternoon. Now, I'd like to go back and look at things, and since the name of your forum was Economic Development and linking economic development to patents, I wanted to go back a long period of time ago when the Kiev waves were first, or conjunctive, curves were first found. This was an economist that studied economic data, several centuries ago, and figured out that the economies would rise and fall in slow waves. Now, at the time, he didn't know why that was the case. It was just an observation that, in fact, this occurred, that economies went through growth in economic development, then they fell off. Then they would grow again and fall off. It wasn't till much later that a gentleman called Schumpeter ended up studying that and realized the connection between technology development and economic development. It's hard in the world that we live in today to see why that should be such a big thing, but you have to remember that these gentlemen were working at times when data and databases did not exist. So putting together the amount of economic data and later on the technical data to come up with these conclusions was quite astounding for them at the time. And it was a realization then that technology actually was the thing that was driving the growth and the fall of the economic cycles that really set the stage then for what we're going to be speaking about today. And that is the fact that the patent protection really enables that technology development. There's a reason why the long-range curves that you see from Schumpeter started to compress a bit. And part of that was because invention moved from single individuals to large corporate laboratories. The first one in the US was around the 1800s. It was by Thomas Edison, one of our famous inventors. And he actually not only invented himself, but he put together a group of people working in a research laboratory to come up with the ideas to speed the development. One of the things that Edison discovered is that he needed to get patents. And the reason for that was he was investing his own money in funding this R&D lab. And what he needed was a way that after the invention went public, he could generate better than average returns from people so that he could pay the scientists and engineers that he had in his laboratory. So what you start to see over time, and the second graph shows, is you start to see the number of patents increasing. It's increasing because the sophistication of research and development and bringing products commercial in the world, that price has increased through the years. And to give the investors a return on that investment that's protected for the first few years that a new invention comes out, patent activity started to rise. Now what you'll see is that as time went from the case of just looking at inventing new steels to electricity, and now as we talk about the knowledge economy, the amount of innovative activity has greatly increased, and therefore you see in this graph the patents significantly rising in the last period of time. Now why should we be able to invent faster today? And to that I want to address the third trend, and that is the fact that the R&D and business development has become a management science. When Thomas Edison was first working in his laboratory, he was experimenting with what would make a good light bulb. But the other experiment that he was running was he was experimenting in how do you bring humans together to be organized in a way that can invent faster than a single individual. And what we see is after the Second World War that occurred, fortunately, before my time, after that event, R&D labs became a very important part of a corporation's activities. At that time, when they were first put together, they were thought, I don't know if you've heard the term of an ivory tower, but they were considered isolated activities. What people discovered is if you, instead of having R&D be isolated, if you have it brought into the main management function of a corporation, you could create wealth faster, the economy would develop quicker, and that you could benefit society to a much greater extent than if you leave it decoupled. And in particular, in the last 2 decades, since the 1990s, R&D switched from being something that people kind of understood how you would manage. It evolved into an organization that had the discipline of a manufacturing organization. People learned how they could define a problem more accurately, define the kind of R&D that it would be needed to be successful in solving that problem, and how to rapidly put just the right people and resources on that to bring that to market in the shortest period of time. And in the last 2 decades, there's been a significant improvement in this area. The jargon that's used in the software area is to have agile development, and that's compressed the cycle times of up to 50 to 100 times. So what you see then, if you ask, well, why did this patent curve just shoot up in the last couple of decades? Part of it is because people have understood how you can research and commercialize technology much more rapidly than was being able to do in the past. So what we have the capability here now is this R&D capability, along with it, the intellectual property focus. It allows people to efficiently find opportunities and ensure an advantaged commercial position. Now, what I've set you up for is that can either be the key to success or failure. It can be the key to success if you're commercially successful, but it doesn't guarantee that. It could be failure as well. So the question is, since intellectual property is being developed at this fast rate, since R&D is being developed at this fast rate, how do you make sense of it so that you can make sure, rather than failure, what you end up with is commercial success? So I come to the second part of my talk and address that second issue. So there's lots of press. I gave you several examples in my first slide. Here's some more examples. The newspapers are full of cases where people are now talking about intellectual property being important for business. In all of the articles that are written, hundreds bordering on thousands today, the question is it the business need that's important? Is it the way you manage the intellectual property? Is it how you address a specific business question or more general question about an industry? Are there ways to measure what you're doing so that you can make sure that it's success, not failure, that you get from your efforts? So looking at this, one of the ways in which has helped myself look at this is to really look at a hierarchy of business needs. And there was a book written in the late 1990s called Edison in the Boardroom, and that was the first book that made the association between intellectual property needs and human needs. Now, I'm going to build on the work of another scientist. His name was Maslow, and he was a person who looked at human needs and what the hierarchy is. If you've heard of that or not? Okay, some heads are shaking yes. So Maslow found out that the most important thing for a human is to be able to breathe. And what he discovered is if you can't breathe, after a while, there's nothing else you can think about. So if you're willing to run an experiment with me, I'd like you all to take a deep breath. And if you'll just hold it and see how much longer you can concentrate on what I'm saying while your breath is being held. If you want to experiment, you may. If you don't, that's okay. But take a deep breath. So what Maslow decided is that it's really important to understand that as a human, or as I'm going to make a case as a company, if you can't breathe, you can't concentrate on building a house. You can't concentrate on gathering food. You can't worry about your family and whether it's working together well. If you can't breathe, pretty soon, you've got to take a breath. And if you're trying not to breathe, you just have to give up concentrating on it. Why do I mention this? Because if you think about what happens in a commercial business, there is an underlying need. And I've had this driven to me by several CEOs that I've worked for. And one of the things they usually made clear to me on the first day that I worked for them is they would say to me, "Paul, if you ever surprise me, you're fired." And that's one of the first rules of business is you never, ever surprise your boss. You can do things that aren't right, but you better be honest. We heard this morning as the first speaker was mentioning, Honesty is a really important thing and a thing as a human we have to be aware of. If you're not going to be honest with people, if you surprise people, that's the end. So the first thing in a business, no surprises. If you get past no surprises, and I've run large R&D organizations, the second thing my boss usually asks me to do is, Paul, I expect you to build this company so that it grows in the future and that we make good profits and that we're healthy and we can serve society. And so a sustained advantaged market position is what the next thing was that my boss asked for. And if I was lucky enough to put things together in a way that I was accomplishing that, usually the third question they came to me with is, Paul, I know you're doing a good job, but are you doing absolutely everything you can to take full use of the assets that we've entrusted to you? That was usually a big challenge, so I often didn't get to the fourth step, but that was, if you're doing it so well, look at ways to speed up this process. The world needs new things. We need to do this faster. And then, in the last thing, is there ways that you can help whole industries, not just our company, to be of value? Now, the reason why I mention this is this ties very directly to the roles that intellectual property plays, and I think it is really important, at least for myself, when I think of patents and different forms of intellectual property, to think about how is it helping the company. There's some things that patents can do to help us with freedom to operate. If you have researched an area and are really sure that your idea is unique and no one else has been working in that, then you've got freedom to operate. That means your company is not going to be surprised. So having a good understanding of intellectual property at one level is to understand freedom to operate. Again, I said the next thing that was important to me was to do something of value to create a sustained advantage position. And as we heard this morning, patents, copyrights, trademarks give you an exclusive position so that the hard work you do to build a market, you get to experience the return and the fruit of that labor from some period of time after you do so. So it's these relationships between business need and intellectual property needs that form the basis for understanding of all this confusion around intellectual property. How can we look at it in a way that might make it simpler to understand how it can be managed and how we can use it to advantage? Business needs, intellectual property needs, or roles. Now, these are still at a pretty high level, so you might say, well, those are nice words, Paul, but I'm not sure that I know yet what to do. So one of the things that people have looked at is, what are some of the real things that you want intellectual property to do? So if we look at the bottom red or peach color row that we have there under freedom to operate, there are questions like, is my industry using intellectual property in a thoughtful manner? Some industries don't understand the use of intellectual property well, and they fight with one another a lot. And if you're in an industry like that, there's not too much you can do about it except to try and get your colleagues to understand better intellectual property and how it can be used thoughtfully as opposed to making your industry unprofitable. One of my large companies was a paper industry. And in that industry, in the U.S., the leaders of those organizations did not understand their business very well, and the paper industry was very, very unprofitable. It was a hard industry to make money in, and it's because people were not wise in the way they managed their companies. There's other questions at that level of, do I have enough intellectual property? Is it too much? Is it too little? As we look at portfolio management, there's things around, for the patent families that I have, are they just the right ones? There was discussion earlier, do I just have a